When Trish Regan got fired by Fox Business because of her controversial opinion on the coronavirus pandemic in 2020, a lot of people thought she was to blame for the way things ended. For them, she had gone too far, and her bosses had no choice but to take strong action. Fast forward 5 years later, and Regan is still very active in the media world, and to her credit has kept her voice as important as possible as a podcaster. However, beyond her well-known public image, there's a side of Trish Regan that many people don't know about. Join us as we share the untold truth of Trish Regan. For one, there are those who had no idea that Regan was born Patricia and Regan and competed in beauty pageants when she was younger. While growing up in New Hampshire, Regan spent some of her teenage summers serving and clearing tables in other areas within New England. She was so proud of where she was born that she felt honored to have won the Miss New Hampshire title and to get the chance to represent her home state in the Miss America 1994 pageant. In one interview, she talked about how much work she had to put in during this part of her life. She said competing in pageants is about more than just looking pretty. You have to be able to connect with lots of different people. You have to be able to think on your feet, and those are skills you learn in a pageant. Walking in high heels and a swimsuit is a skill all by itself, and one I don't miss. Regan didn't win Miss USA 1994, but she won a special award for her opera performance, which is probably a surprise to many devoted fans who had no idea that their favorite podcaster had this incredible singing ability. Regan was actually so good at singing that she was confident about becoming a professional artist. She dedicated her life to studying voice in Graz, Austria, and at the New England Conservatory of Music in Boston. But fate had other plans beyond singing. Regan had always known she had a talent for journalism and was pretty good with numbers, too. She had gotten into journalism when she was in 5th grade, loving everything that had to do with reporting and writing. She even held the position of school reporter for her local New Hampshire newspaper. But while it was clear enough that Regan was passionate about journalism, it was only after her program was finished at the New England Conservatory of Music in Boston that she went to Columbia University to study history. Another surprising fact about Regan is that while she studied, she decided to pursue a career in finance and worked as an analyst in emerging debt markets at Goldman Sachs. Her ability to speak Spanish opened opportunities for her in the Latin American sovereign debt markets. So, she focused mainly on Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, and Venezuela. But all that changed when Bloomberg Television offered her an opportunity to work as a reporter. Seeing the chance to combine her financial knowledge with journalism, Regan made the jump into financial reporting without thinking twice. Starting at Bloomberg in 2000, she was on the front lines as the dot-com bubble burst. She covered what happened after from Silicon Valley and San Francisco as a reporter at MarketWatch before moving back to New York to work as a reporter for CBS News. At CBS MarketWatch, Regan was a business reporter reporting for the CBS Evening News. She also contributed to Face the Nation and 48 Hours. While she was still working at CBS News, Regan also worked as a reporter for CBS Money Watch. In 2002, she earned the Most Outstanding Young Broadcast Journalist Award from the Northern California Society of Professional Journalists for her work there. 4 years later, Regan returned to her financial roots as an anchor on CNBC's top-rated daily markets program, The Call. Her report on the terror connection between the tri-border region of South America and Islamic terrorist groups earned her an Emmy nomination for investigative reporting in 2007. Regan also got a Gerald Loeb nomination for her documentary work on Against the Tide, The Battle for New Orleans, an investigative piece on the New Orleans levee system after Hurricane Katrina. During her time at CNBC, Regan also reported business news for NBC's Nightly News and The Today Show. She reported on the 2008 financial crisis in real time. In addition, she produced and hosted the 2 most highly rated documentaries in CNBC's history, Marijuana Incorporated and Marijuana USA, which investigated a huge and fast-developing underground industry. She would later publish her book, Joint Ventures, Inside America's Almost Legal Marijuana Industry, where she predicted that the industry would soon become mainstream. That was in 2010. To be honest, Regan was such a valuable asset during this period of the 2010s that it wasn't shocking that she still had an ongoing relationship with the media companies that she worked with earlier in her career. For example, she was still working with Bloomberg Television by 2015, hosting the daily global market show Street Smart with Trish Regan. However, there are those who don't know that Regan's career really took off in 2015 when she joined Fox News and Fox Business to host the Intelligence Report with Trish Regan on weekdays. And with this exposure came controversies. Just 2 years after she joined Fox, there were reports that Regan had been handpicked by Fox News then boss Roger Ailes to replace Megyn Kelly, who had left the network because, according to her, primetime cable news was a snake pit. After Kelly's departure, many expected her slot to be taken up by the next female anchor. And with the initial suggestion that Regan's hiring had happened for this sole purpose, everyone thought she was a sure thing. But to everyone's shock, Roger Ailes had resigned after getting hit with numerous sexual misconduct accusations months before Kelly left. He was no longer making any decisions on the board. The network eventually made the decision to put Tucker Carlson Tonight into Kelly's empty time slot. There were those who believed that if Roger Ailes was still in control, Regan would have taken up Kelly's primetime 9 p.m. time slot. Regan quickly moved on from that disappointment and a year later switched to a traditional conservative talk format for a new primetime show titled Trish Regan Primetime. This was a step in the direction of more control over her journalism. Regan was pulling up a seat for herself at the high table for heavier matters. Unfortunately, Regan sniffed around the wrong den and picked the wrong opponent. She hosted the Fox Business segment entitled Something Rotten in Denmark. In the segment, she compared Denmark to Venezuela, a country that was deep in political trouble and whose economy was surrounded by kegs of gunpowder. In her words, Denmark, like Venezuela, has stripped people of their opportunities. She described what she believed was rotten in the Scandinavian country. Starting with the high taxes the area is famous for, she said that Denmark's freebies were anything but free. She stated no one wants to work. She wasn't surprised this was the case, given that the Danes were paid money to attend university, and in her opinion, this was an incentive for laziness. Regan added that when the Danes did eventually graduate, all they wanted to start were cupcake cafes. This was her warning about the dangers of socialism. As you would expect, Denmark didn't see it that way. For them, this wasn't a helpful criticism of their beloved country, and therefore, they needed to respond with the facts and figures. Denmark's Social Democrats decided to release a video response to disprove everything Regan had said about welfare, school, and employment. This comeback was soon followed by a bunch of stats that compared Denmark and the U.S. in terms of economic stability and growth. Then Danish Finance Minister Christian Jensen even said Regan should come to Denmark if she dared to be confronted with facts and pointed out that Denmark was 11 places higher than the U.S. in OECD rankings for employment rates. Unfortunately for Regan, fellow Americans who disagreed with her conservatism poured gas into the fire, and her own fans found it difficult to defend her. After her remarks were criticized in the U.S. and Danish press, many expected her to issue an apology since it was clearly on her if she didn't get her facts right. Instead, Regan attempted to clarify her remarks, saying she was never saying that conditions in Denmark were similar in any way to the current tragedy on the ground there in Venezuela. Then she added she was merely pointing out using reports from The Atlantic, The Independent, and other publications that socialism is not the way. Calling out these sources didn't win her any favors as they quickly defended themselves and distanced themselves from the controversies. This backlash from inside and outside was quite loud, but Regan kept her job for the next 2 years. The coronavirus pandemic was a challenging time for many people around the world. As many dealt with the loss of loved ones, almost everyone felt the economic impacts of restricted movement. At the beginning of March 2020, when early cases were being found across the world, no one saw the catastrophe that was about to unfold, least of all Regan. As cases were increasing in the U.S., Regan went on air on the 9th of March to deliver her expert commentary on the issue facing the country at the moment. Regan's headline segment was entitled Coronavirus Impeachment Scam. She said the chorus of hate being aimed at the president is nearing a crescendo as Democrats blame him and only him for a virus that started halfway around the world. This is yet another attempt to impeach the president, and sadly, it seems they care very little for any of the destruction they are leaving in their wake. Reagan repeated, "This is impeachment all over again." She went on to accuse the liberal media of using the outbreak to demonize and destroy the president. These comments didn't sit well with viewers. In fact, many healthcare professionals and lawmakers were furious about it. In the days that followed, global markets crashed as fears over the economic impact of the virus coupled with falling oil prices sparked investor panic. This wasn't good news for anyone, especially Fox News and the Fox Business Network, which came under fire for how its top hosts initially covered the pandemic. Before the end of that month, Reagan's segment had received so much backlash, Fox Network decided it was necessary to place her show on a temporary break. Widespread criticism only worsened, and the network eventually removed her show from its lineup. The network went a step further and ended its relationship with her. And that was the end of Trish Regan at Fox. However, it was the beginning of Trish Regan, the podcaster. She had seen the opportunities the internet provided for anyone who was willing to do the work and build a following. Luckily for her, she was already a well-known face with her own loyal following. So following her firing from the big networks, Reagan reappeared in 2021 with her own podcast, The Trish Regan Show. With over 1.1 million followers on YouTube alone, tens of millions of views per month, Reagan has transformed herself from a former Fox employee to a media powerhouse. Her podcast is literally one of YouTube's top 100 podcasts.